We live?
I just clicked the button. We're live.
We're live.
Hey, Dave. You
Yeah,
might
yeah.
notice we're without our usual accoutrement. We don't have our countdown and our.
Yeah. No, this is just a testament to totally being unscripted, right? So welcome to 60 Minutes of Unscripted.net discussion. Each week, the .NET Doc Show features a special developer community guest. Today, we're joined by Rodney Littles II. Super excited to have you on, sir.
Thank you.
So as doctors of .NET, we examine all things .NET and prescribe best practices, right? So this isn't just focusing on docs.microsoft.com. This is really us putting on our .NET doctor's hat and kind of looking at all the things. But as Cam pointed out, today is a special, very, very special episode. Looks like someone forgot to pay the bill, so the lights went out. We are now powered by StreamYard, and all of our branding, all of our transition videos, all of our welcome stuff is gone.
We still have banners.
We have banners.
Where are our banners? There we are.
Like the little ticker banners, right?
So I can still do this.
Okay.
Nice.
And stuff like that. And here, I don't know if I can here. Let's welcome.
See, folks, it's not just technologists that need it. Like everybody needs help with technology, not just the regular people.
So look, I can still share comments from guests. So
cool.
We're just gonna have fun, guests. This is we have. What's funny is we have one of our most anticipated guests that we've had in a while.
Oh no. Where is he? Or where is she? Better yet. Yeah. Oh
no. Yeah, Rodney, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves? This is the first time I've met you. I've seen you, do .NET Foundation stuff and seen you on Twitter and everything, and I've been really looking forward to meeting you. So why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, your shtick, and all that.
So, man, I'm really just a developer trying to be better, kind of like all of us out there, right? Like I went to school, they threw some technology at me and they said, go out there and become a developer. So .NET was a thing. I came in the early days, like .NET 1.0, and I've watched .NET mature and evolve. In that time, I have gone from being a web front end to a web service oriented architecture developer. That's the precursor to microservices for all you new school folks. Go look up SOA. It's great. It was the best. We had none of the new tools that you had, but we were trying to do the exact same thing. So I went from there to becoming a mobile developer. I became a mobile developer, was watching Xamarin Evolve 2016, learned about reactive extensions and reactive programming, and was challenged by one of the developers on stage to build better mobile apps with it. I got involved in the open source community, and next thing I knew, I was helping maintain Reactive Ui as a project. And then from there, now I'm on the board for the .NET Foundation because open source really kind of changed the way I looked at my career path. Before it was very much, I got up every day, I went to work and work was the thing. But now I found a community of developers that like to tinker with different technologies. And that's been a really fun thing for me because it's no longer just about some business value that some business person wants. Like now I get to add value where I see fit on my terms. And that's the main thing that open source has given to me. So yeah, that's kind of my shtick. I'm just a guy trying to be the best he can be at the things that he does and trying to help other people be better at the things that they want to do.
That's awesome. That is absolutely amazing. And we're so thrilled to have you on today.
I'm excited to be here. Man, when you accepted the offer, I was like, oh man, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then I watched a couple episodes and I was like, oh, these guys are awesome. They just sit and talk. I can do this all day.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. So I'm one of the hosts, David Pine, and I'm joined by co-host Cam Soper. And again, we're here welcoming Rodney to our show. Why don't we jump right into the checkup?
But we don't have our usual. Here. I'm gonna improvise something. Just go with me on this, okay?
All right.
It's a checkup. It's a checkup. Get excited. It's a checkup. It's a checkup. It's a checkup on the .NET Show now.
Spirit fingers.
Oh my God! Hopefully, don't ever do that again.
Oh, this is great, guys. This is great. I'm actually glad that I'm here for the low tech day, right? Because it makes it so much more fun.
Oh God, it hurts. Oh, that's awesome. So we do have a link that we wanted to share. Typically what we do in our checkup segment is we kind of focus in on docs content, we'll look at something from either, docs.microsoft.com, some .NET or ASP.NET core content, or Azure content, or even Learn modules, things of that nature. But we decided today, being that Rodney's, representing the .NET Foundation, and he's, a maintainer on Reactive Ui, we would throw an Akka link their way. So akka.ms/Reactive Ui is going to get you to Reactive Ui GitHub repo. And this repo has got quite a bit of stars. I just started it myself this morning. So approaching 6,000. So if you go here, if you've used Reactive Ui, if you're one of those people who kind of peruse looking at this code, or you get inspired by it, you post an issue, be sure to smash that star button. And then since it's open source, all the things that Rodney talked about before are things that you can do. You can exercise your right to post issues, create pull requests, fork, collaborate, ask questions, learn, look behind the curtains of this amazing platform, and start utilizing it. So I've never looked at this stuff here before, so I'm super excited to drill into it. There's a ton of various tags. So correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, you say Hacktoberfest. Have you been getting a lot of activity for Hacktoberfest?
Honestly, not that much. It's funny. Our consumers are actually very interesting in that they love what we provide, and they tinker a lot. So generally, when we've gotten a couple of pull requests, but they weren't specific to. They weren't the general. Oh, we're updating your README to remove that space. Hacktoberfest. Like, we've had actual pull requests that are helping advance the framework during Hacktoberfest, which is a blessing, because a lot of people are getting these, hey, I changed your README, give me my t-shirt. And I'm like,
Oh, right. Oh, that's
awesome.
awesome.
So we've actually gotten helpful things that were going to advance the framework during Hacktoberfest. So we're happy about that.
Was that wrong? Should I not have done that?
I mean, I've done it. I mean, first off, who doesn't like a t-shirt? Let's be honest. I want a t-shirt, but I'm willing to give you a little bit more than just, hey, I fixed some spaces.
Right. Yeah, that's a good call out. So in looking at this repo a little bit more, I noticed that there's a link here. So if you go there, it takes you to the Reactive Ui websites where you have documentation, which is great. And one thing that you shared before the show started, Rodney, was this link to some old documentation. You're like, maybe we should share this. And I looked at it and I said, wow, this is from 2011. So I'm going to zoom in real quick and start drawing some stuff and crying when I do.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
So you remember last week when I taught you the Control 4 thing in Zoom It?
Yeah.
So right now in that view that you're in, hold Control and Shift.
Control Shift. I'm gonna restart my machine, aren't I? Control.
No. Trust me on this. Hold Control and Shift, down. And then click, and then drag.
Oh. Okay. Yeah, you got all the little. Yeah. All right.
Zoom It's kind of my thing.
Yeah. All right. I'm good with that. Anyways, I think mine added more character. So, anyways, we're calling attention to the fact that this is from 2011. So I said, we can do better. This is a Microsoft thing. It's been around for a long time. It's been backed by Microsoft. I should restate that, right? So
it was actually created at Microsoft. So yeah, if you don't mind, I'm actually just going to roll right over you and go right into it. So Reactive Extensions. I found Reactive Extensions recently, but it's been around since 2010. Eric Mayer and Wes Dyer were working at Microsoft. All of the videos are available on Channel 9. You can go watch them. I did it. It melted my brain, because you see these two mathematicians over there talking about monads and pull and push and all of these things that you as a developer don't care about. But what they're trying to get to, yeah, exactly. What they found was you have IEnumerable, right? And IEnumerable is more or less a static collection, in the sense that you go to a data store, you go get a set of values, a finite set of values, and you pull those back. What push-based is really more of your Twitter model, right? Where you don't know how many tweets are going to come through on your feed, but Twitter is just pushing you that content. And then you get a notification that says, hey, you've got new content. You can do whatever you want with it. So instead of doing an IAC or I enumerable of T, you could end up doing like just an I observable of T and get the same asynchronous processing. And now instead of going and getting one value and getting a notification that you've completed, you're going and getting an endless stream of values until it sends you a completion notification. So it's really just a different way to look at getting data. No longer am I going to a data store and saying, give me this finite set. I'm just an open book saying, hey, as long as you respect this contract, push me some data. And when you're done, tell me you're done.
Awesome. Absolutely. Yeah. So I was inspired by this old content here. And I know that there was some stuff you mentioned, you poured it over into the Reactive UI docs, but as anyone coming to .NET, I want them to feel as though it's a comfort place for them. I want them to feel as though they can jump into the .NET docs content and find reactive extensions details. So I just 15 minutes ago created this issue where I'm taking it upon myself to pull these over from MSDN and get them officially stood up in .NET content. So look forward to that. Probably
and
post.
That's how
.NET
open
5.
source works. Yeah.
Right.
You can just go do it.
Right. And then so you're a part of the .NET Foundation. We already talked about that.
Yeah, I just got elected to the board.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, kudos on that.
Thank you very much. And it's funny because I don't particularly care for politics. I'm not much of a politician because I have this thing where sometimes things fall out of my face and people look at me weird because it was the wrong thing for it to fall out of my face. But the important part was the community, right? Like I said earlier, like .NET open source really did change the way I viewed my career path. Like no longer did I have to be tied down to some company and some random business. Like I could grow my skill set and help other developers grow their skill set at the same time. So that's really one of the things that the .NET Foundation is trying to take a much firmer stance on, is how do we grow a healthy open source ecosystem? Because you hear a lot of people talk about the .NET open source ecosystem isn't really open source, or it's not like the other open source platforms or languages, and they're not wrong, but we're different, and that's okay. How do we maneuver in that difference? How do we make that difference work for us? Right? Very simple. Like I said, David said, he just put an issue on the repo. That's how open source works. It doesn't work where you feel like you have SLAs and somebody's supposed to give you exactly what you want. It works where I'm consuming your service and I respect your time and you respect mine because we're both developers. And at the end of it, I want to help you advance your framework and I want you to solve my issue. So let's work together to do that. And I think that that's the main thing that's missing in the .NET ecosystem. I'm not gonna say it's missing because it's there, because that's been my experience, and my experience has been very positive throughout the 5 years that I've been contributing in open source. So that's what I want. I want people to come and have a great first experience, to come to a framework and say, hey, you've got a typo here, and submit a pull request, and that's value add, right? There's an issue that I can't figure out. I create a reproducible sample. Like those are good things, being a good consumer. And that's really what we want to do, is we want to build that bridge between consumers and producers, because it's very easy for a .NET developer to think the old school Microsoft way where, hey, they broke it, they got to fix it, and it's them. And if they don't do it right away, but the reality of it is, I got a day job and I'm doing this at nights and weekends, and I want to help because I'm a developer. I don't want you depending on any developer that is okay with you depending on their software, and their software is falling over, should probably, reconsider their life choices. But, because none of us like that, right? Like we've all been that developer that pushes something to production on a Friday and it's like everything falls over, but I'm on my way to vacation, right? None of us like that feeling. So how do we grow as a community and help each other become better? Because that's really what it is. I've had a lot of people in the .NET open source community help grow my talents and my skills. I'm not the same developer I was 10 years ago. And that's the story that we want to tell. We want to be able to tell the story of people coming into the .NET open source community, feeling comfortable, being able to get issues resolved, being able to help advance frameworks, and getting value out of the consumption. I think it's really
interesting that you mentioned explicitly like producers and consumers, but from the community aspect of, open source. Mm-hmm. And the irony with that statement is that you're a maintainer on Reactive, right? So it's like, that's producers and consumers. That's what it is, right? The entire philosophy behind that. So I think it's really interesting. I can speak from personal experience. I just stood up an open source project and it's a lot of work. You start getting issues in and pull requests and you're like, oh my God, like I have a day job. also this is cool, but at the same time, like, oh, there's like such contention internally. It's like, why did I do this? But then, oh, this is so cool that I'm doing this. Like,
Yeah, that feeling in your stomach when you're like when your stomach drops out because you got a new issue and it's like you're just about to go to bed, but you want to look at it because you know the person's on the other side of the globe and you don't want them to wait 20. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And that's the thing I guess I want to explain to consumers, because I'm a consumer as well. Like, I'm not just a producer. I consume a lot of open source software. As a consumer, like, we understand we don't want you to feel alone. We don't want you to go days and days without resolution, because it doesn't feel good for anyone.
So do you have any advice for like, I mean, this is kind of a bigger scope problem, but like when I used to do consulting before joining Microsoft, and I was doing the whole evangelism role, but when I would do consulting, I'd work with various enterprise companies, and they had a lot of difficulty kind of getting over the hurdle of accepting open source. Like, there was this huge like barrier where they would just say, we need to write all the code. And it's like, well, wait a second, this problem's been solved. Like, and here's all these different options. Like, you know, how is it that, you know, you would suggest, you know, those types of companies getting over that fear? Like, what types of checks and balances are there?
Oh, that's a really good question. So what I would say is this. The main thing is, like you said, you really don't want to reinvent the wheel. Even if you just go grab the repository, fork it, and bring it local to your own code, I think that's better than going and writing it yourself. Standing on the backs of giants is really where you want to be in this industry. You know, you don't want to go back to the beginning and rebuild Linux from the ground up. That's a $2 billion project, right? So why not just, you know, build on what's already there and consume and contribute back? So I think the main thing that I see, and I'm getting into that more of a consulting role, the main thing that I see is that in a lot of these .NET shops, the shops themselves have legal clauses where their developers actually physically can't write any code for an open source project. And I think that that's the number one thing that needs to change, right? Like, yes, from a consumption perspective, but once we understand that this is a global .NET ecosystem, Microsoft is no longer going to be responsible for solving all your problems. We can, as a community, start to appreciate what that looks like. In a lot of places, I get it, right? Because like, you're always pressed for time, you're always pressed for a deadline, but having some time built in, making the consumption of open source not just something that you do because it solved a problem, but something that's part of your culture, I think is really where it starts. Even if it's just, hey, let's go and evaluate what open source libraries exist that we can solve. Now, I'm actually working at a place now where they're consuming open source at a very interesting rate, and they have no problem consuming open source. And I've had that conversation with some of the architects, because like, well, how is it that you guys are okay with this? And that's exactly the point. They say, Rodney, we don't want to go rewrite this code. We don't want to be responsible. We don't want our business to have to incur the cost of having to maintain that code that doesn't actually advance the business. So then the question becomes, well, if you're okay with that, how can we work with your legal departments? How can we work with, you know, the folks that own them, that have the money, and figure out how they can contribute either through code, through issues, through what have you, or through money to these projects, so that these projects can advance. Because, you know, you just started a project, so you understand, like, now you've got to create a logo, and you've got to create documentation, and you've got to put up a website, and like, that's not a lot of money, right? Like, I could probably run the majority of what Reactive UI needs for $50 a month.
Right.
But it's the overall concept of, we are trying to build an ecosystem, a community. And if we can't get regular developers, and I use that term very, very loosely, right? If we can't get regular .NET developers to feel like they are part of that community, then there is no community. Consumers, producers don't matter, because they're not consuming. I'm producing, but they can't consume. It doesn't matter. So really, I think Microsoft has done a good job to really kind of set that standard of, hey, we're open source. This is a thing. You know, we're building a foundation to kind of give some checks and balances around what we consider maturity. So let's continue down that road. Let's figure out what we as a community consider a worthy project, or a mature enough project for an enterprise to depend on, and let's try and bring more projects to that place.
Do you think maybe that there's a bit of the same problem that we have in getting .NET adoption, that you know, well, .NET's Windows only. It's established itself as a Windows only player. Do you think we have some of that same problem in the open source world, where Microsoft is giving us this .NET thing? That's not open source. That's .NET. Do you think there's some of that problem?
Yes, I do actually. And it's funny that you asked that question, because I was having because I'm on the board and I've got some friends that maintain, and we are coming to that exact conclusion. Like, Microsoft is a company. Microsoft has a platform called .NET. That platform is open source. Now, what does open source mean, right? Because we're getting into semantics. Open source just means that the source is available for you to peruse on the internet, right? Now, let's take it a step further. Microsoft is really going down this path of, we want the community to help maintain and push the direction of .NET. So the .NET framework, and I know that it's no longer the framework, it's .NET Core, so like words are hard. But the .NET framework as it exists today in .NET Core is a fully open sourced project. It is owned and operated by Microsoft. Microsoft has a burden of making sure that that is production ready for all .NET consumers, right? So yeah, I don't expect to be able to come to .NET and say, hey, you should change the entire direction of this feature. That's, in all honesty, that's unrealistic. But what is realistic is, hey, I was running .NET Test and .NET Test blew up. Here are my logs. Can somebody take a look at it? That's where it is. Now, again, if I'm an enterprise developer, I may not have the time to do that. And I may not have the time to do that because of the deadlines, because of the way that the enterprise is working. So how do we find ways to give better practices to the enterprises, teach them how to consume the open source, and then use that to their advantage to get them to consume and help maintain that open source, right? Because if we can get big companies to accept that they own, maybe not necessarily the .NET framework, but all of the potential libraries around it, and we get them to accept some level of ownership, we may be able to change the narrative there.
That's awesome. We do have some questions coming in. I wanted to make sure we get to those. So Nina was asking, if I want to start getting into open source, where do I start? It's frankly a bit overwhelming.
Oh, wow. So if that was literally my question to my buddy when he got me into it. Another David. So one of the Davids that was on that list of Davids, David Driscoll, I asked him the exact same question, Nina. So I will tell you, you are not alone. You are not the only person out there that doesn't understand, right? Mine was, I started consuming Cake, which Cake is a build tool that was built for C# and .NET. And I was consuming cake.slack, and one of the maintainer of that plugin worked for the actual main project, and there was a typo that I was seeing in my build output that was driving me crazy. So I submitted a pull request to fix the typo because it was driving me crazy. And here I am 5 years later. So fix a typo. Find a project that you consume. Like, how many NuGet packages do you consume on a daily basis? Pick one of those, a small project. And I actually encourage it to be a smaller project than a bigger project, because what I'm finding is in the open source community in .NET, the larger projects are already kind of more stable. It's the little guys that need help. It's the little guys that are going to really appreciate you coming in and just, hey, there's a feature that I saw. This is how you said you wanted to implement it. Here's the spec. I went and did it. Or here's this bug that I encountered. So getting involved in open source is really consume it. And then when you find problems or when you find things that you want to make better, make it better.
Well, and on the docs team, that's actually one of our favorite questions, because we have a whole lot of opportunities in docs for first-time contributors. So Nina, if you want to get involved and you just like, hey, I want to submit my first pull request and feel like I did something useful, you can head out to the .NET docs repo, not like .NET docs our show, but the actual .NET /docs, github.com/github/.net/docs, and look through those, look through the issues on there. And we have a collection of issues that are tagged good for first timers.
And there's other ones too that are like up for grabs. A lot of times that's a common label that's shared amongst the industry, specifically within GitHub. So GitHub is just one platform. There's other open source ecosystems that are available out there to consume. So it's not like you're limited to that. LQDev1 shares some thoughts here. He says, giving back is so important. Much of this code is in critical operations, but without support, it's hard for maintainers to keep up with the demands and improvements.
Yes. Thank you for pointing that out. And it's, I always appreciate consumers that understand that, because that proves to me that the efforts that we're putting in are not in vain, right? Somebody gets
Exactly. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's, for me, there's always a sense of frustration personally when I hear people like complaining about open source projects or like that. It's like, don't complain, take that energy and go focus on fixing the problem, right? Contribute, be a part of this community. Don't bash it, foster it.
Yeah. And I'll go even further. Like I've had a couple of people come and have a problem, fix it halfway, submit a half done pull request, and we still go and grab that pull request and bring it across the finish line.
Right.
Why? Because that developer took the time to think through the problem, helped us. And even though they may have walked away, found other things, got busy, that can help the community. So even if you just push a half-baked pull request to solve a problem, that adds value. Like I cannot stress enough, every little bit helps.
Awesome. We got actually a bunch of questions coming in, so we're going to kind of focus on this for a bit.
Yeah, sure.
Our friend Obina, I'm not sure if that's the correct enunciation. Would there be good support for Reactive Ui in Maui?
Ooh, so this is like a loaded question, and I've been getting this question a lot lately. As a matter of fact, I want to say I answered it on Stack Overflow a couple of weeks ago. So the short answer is yes, and now we're going to get into the long answer. And I say this because I recently gave a talk, and I was trying to explain the difference between like what's going to happen in Maui and what's happening now. Mm-hmm. Reactive Ui, let's take actually a full step back and let's talk about Reactive UI. And I apologize that you asked the question, and we're going to talk about it here, but Reactive UI was started as an MVVM framework. So MVVM is MV star, right? So not MVC, but MVVM, right? And it's an MVVM framework, and MVVM is a pattern that we use really specific in the .NET space because we have what's called a binding engine. So we have this interface called iNotify property changed, and that magical interface is what allows us to build applications. So now you have this concept of MVVM, which you have in the current .NET framework, and you have Maui coming down the pipeline. So James Clancy, who I've know through association, but have not had a chance to sit and interact with him. He's invited me to his Discord channel more times than I care to count, and I'm going to be there one of these days. He came up with this awesome port where now Maui can actually support a different pattern for delivering an application called MVU. So Reactive UI is supported everywhere where .NET is supported. You can use, so Blazor is technically MVU, and you can use Reactive UI right now with Blazor. We support everything: WinForms, Windows, WPF, UWP, Uno, Avalonia, everything. Everywhere where .NET runs, whether it's iOS native or Xamarin Forms, you can take us and use us the exact same way across all. That's MVVM. Now let's talk Maui. Maui is going to introduce this brand new model view update thing, which is similar to what React does, similar to what a lot of the JavaScript frameworks are doing, and it is the basis behind Blazor. And we can get into the semantics of what MVU actually means, because I've had those conversations too, and it's like, no, that's not MVU. Oh, purists is aside. Yes, we will support it. I don't know what it's going to look like. And this is the beauty of Reactive UI and Reactive Extensions in particular. Reactive Extensions plays 110% great in the sandbox with the model view update pattern. So you can take the same concepts that you understand from JavaScript, Java, Kotlin, Go, PHP, Swift, Coca. If you understand Reactive Extensions and you understand the model view update pattern, you can now bring all that power directly into .NET and use it. And Reactive UI should support it. Now, do I know I have personally need to go do some work on the MVU stuff, which is why I need to go spend some time with Clancy. But yeah, it'll be supported. And my plan personally, and this is not speaking for the maintainer core, because there's a core of us that do this, is that we will provide some very specific MVU support, because I want to play with it and I want to see what I can do with it.
Absolutely. Awesome. That was a great response. And I did share a link here to our viewers. And we had a doc on what's new in .NET 5. And we talked about how this was inspired by the Elm architecture. We touch on model view update pattern and kind of show an example, bit of source code and how that might work. So all great things to kind of double click into. We have another question here. Anil says, how to build a mental model for a new open source repository, e.g. MVVM cross, to understand it. So I'm not sure.
The question is a little difficult, but as I understand the question, how do you build a mental model for a new open source repository? Okay, so like let's say, case in point, and I'll just go and be open. Flutter's got some pretty interesting stuff when it comes around to this MVU stuff. So, again, standing on the backs of giants, I'm not going to go try and figure out how to do it myself. I'm going to go steal it from Flutter.
Right.
Because it's under MIT license, I'm not technically stealing it, but I'm going to go steal it from Flutter, right? Because they've got it figured out. Why am I going to go through all that? Yep. So I'm going to go to concept called block, which they use for data persistence. So it takes really nothing for us to go look at that code, fork that code, port it over to C# and then use it. So from a mental model perspective, MVVM cross is probably a little harder because it's a lot more mature, right? We get into there's steps to get there. Reactive Ui has been around in some form or fashion for 10 years, right? Like that's something you're going to build overnight. So I think a year ago, the foundation came up with what was the .NET maturity model. And while I disagreed with some of the points, I understood the purpose. The purpose was exactly that. How do we help somebody go from a brand new project to something that an enterprise software shop can depend on? So how to get there is really a much longer conversation than I think that we can go today. But the mental model that you want to build is you want to bring people in and build a community. It's not enough for you to be the only person that understands the inner working of your code. You want to train somebody early. If you got one person that's really enthusiastic, case in point, Nuke, another build framework, the guy that runs it, he's really enthusiastic, and he's brought me in just because I understand build software and because he and I click. So I'm able to help him advance his project. He's doing it all by himself. Like, the other projects, they have, several collaborators and maintainers. So building that ecosystem, building that community, building a group of people that can stand behind that software, I think is really where you want to begin. And then just take it slow, man. It's you're not going to build Rome in a day.
Exactly. LQ Dev one says, great artists steal. That's an interesting point though about licensing. I'm always hesitant about that because there's so many different licenses out there, and I know that actually Jeff Strauss, a good friend of mine who's on the board, he's done many talks, from the perspective of a lawyer, being also a developer, and like what does it mean to consume open source and the licensing behind it, and borrowing stuff indefinitely, and
yeah. The main thing is just give attribution, right? If I go take that code, I'm just going to say, hey, I took it from right here. I have nothing to hide.
Right.
Well, we have another comment that I think is also germane to this discussion. Vinarki reports that it's often hard that when a PR is ignored or closed, that they don't, a lot of times they don't have a reason, right? And I don't want to call anybody out, but we do have, I do have a repo that I work in, a lot, that the person in charge of maintaining that is really kind of awful about that. He just like, oh, that issue's dumb, closes it, right? Whereas somebody identified it as an issue, and they like need an answer, like, why is this thing broken, right?
Yeah. So Vinarki, I think is how I'm going to pronounce that today, because I probably butchered it, but yes, 1,000 times yes. That's the bad open source experience that we talk about, right? Like I told you, my experiences have been good. I open issues, people respond. I personally, as a maintainer, have not been as good as I would like from a consumer perspective. But yeah, like that's the thing. If you're going to take the time to report the issue, and we've got in Reactive Ui, we've got a Slack channel. We've got a guy who comes in. He's in the Slack channel. He asks questions all the time. He's one of our more loyal consumers, and one day he says, hey, I upgraded to the newest thing, and I'm getting this really weird issue in my stable builds, and I can't ship my production release. I stopped, took 2 hours out of my day just to sit there and walk through what on the new things could have gone through it, like, because I understand. I've been there. I've been that developer where it's like, dude, I got this stuff. Management's breathing down my neck, and this piece of technology is not doing what it's supposed to do. And I'm from the closed source days where that was coming from a third party, and we're paying thousands of dollars for that software. And their response is, "Oh yeah, it'll be done in 3 months."
Right.
Right. But at least now you can have conversations. So I would challenge you to challenge those maintainers in a respectful way. The main thing is about how you approach the conversation. If you take a step back and say, hey, I understand that you may think this issue is dumb, but I'm experiencing this problem. And if you can provide a reproduction, that makes it a lot easier, right? Because then you're giving me concrete evidence that your stuff is broken, go fix it. But, you know, because we get so many issues that it's the same issue. I know one particular thing in Reactive UI where we've closed at least 7 issues in the past 6 months around the exact same problem. And it's the same thing. And it's the most minor thing that you'll only see if you have the certain Visual Studio settings on. And I'm going to be honest, every time I see that issue, I get really pissed off. And I'm just like, close it. Because I've answered it already 1,000 times. I've answered it on Stack Overflow. We've answered it in the chat. But at the same time, if you're having a real issue, I don't want you to feel like you're not getting help, because then you're not going to depend. Talking to the board early this week, and I don't know if I'm allowed to disclose this or not, but I'm going to do it anyway. I was talking about this open source contract, right? And the open source contract as it exists today is I send you to GitHub, I point you at my MIT license, and I tell you to go jump in a lake. But that's not a good feeling for that developer that needs help, right? That doesn't help you at all. What you need is you need somebody to at least acknowledge that you have a problem. So let's build a contract, an actual consumption contract between producers and consumers that allows us, the consumers, to at least enjoy the weekend, right? I want to enjoy my weekend every now and again. I want to go have a beer with my friends, but at the same time, gets you, the consumer, some level, not necessarily a service level agreement, but some understanding of what you can expect from me, the maintainer.
Absolutely. Yeah. Fuel Snowball says that they tried recently on the Windows terminal, but there was MIT licensed code and the PR, and Windows terminal is MIT. So they thought it would be cool. But the problem is that they can't sign a CLA for an MIT. It's interesting licensing quirks and things like that. So I appreciate all of that knowledge.
That gets back to what we were talking about earlier, David, where we want to remove barriers for people to contribute, right? That sounds very much to me like that person may have legal concerns with their job. And and if you don't, because I know for a fact that there are certain licenses that certain legal departments will be okay with. MIT is usually one of them. And then there's some other licenses that they're like, no, you can't contribute to that because technically we own that code at that point. Yeah. So we need to find a way to work with the development shops to make that a non-issue.
Absolutely.
So that the license structure doesn't matter. You just sign this contract, and we understand that you're contributing your time. Your employer understands that you're contributing your time and your talent, and we don't want to own anything proprietary to your business. We just want you to come help fix the stuff that we all depend on as a community.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think this is all these frictions that you keep talking about with the open source community. It really keeps making me think to a talk I gave recently about being empathetic to open source developers, right? Because at the end of the day, all the different connection points, it's people, right? There's people behind that. Someone's doing a pull request, someone's posting an issue. So whoever's posting the issue, you have to be empathetic to them because they have a legitimate concern, right? They have some sort of problem they've encountered. Maybe they don't understand something they're using incorrectly. Also to the other side, the maintainers, right? They are just getting bombarded with people all the time. So you have to be empathetic to their bandwidth, their life, their other, you've got a day job that's not sitting there just maintaining, which, Reactive UI, which could be a full-time job, right? So go sponsor someone on GitHub, right? Help them out.
Yeah, definitely.
We have another one here. ST says, hello, I was wondering why C# doesn't have built-in functions for heaps in the same way as Java does. Well,
so heaps, we're talking about like the data structure, right?
I think, or yeah, that's do you have any more? If you could add more context there, ST, that'd be helpful. But I would like to call attention to the fact that C#, the language, is actually open sourced as well. It's designed and developed and prototyped in the open. We shared very often actually sharplab.io, which is a website from a community member who lets you actually pick different branches for the features of C# so that you can go play with them in a REPL online and kind of test out feature stuff. So, but you could go post that question to that repository and you'll get an actual response from the team who's maintaining it. I don't know the answer though. I'd be curious why that exists in Java, right? There's lots of questions around that. I mean, it's kind of a loaded question. So. And then you just shared Sharp Lab.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's all.
Yeah, this is great. This is awesome so far. I'm loving this.
Me too.
So what are some of the biggest struggles that you've encountered? I mean, you talked kind of holistically with some of the stuff for the .NET Foundation, some of the friction points you guys are working to address. Is that just based on the experience you've had from Reactive UI as a maintainer? And how long have you been doing the maintainer role for Reactive UI?
Well, and if you can bake into this answer, I'm not really much of a UI guy. So just like the kind of the elevator pitch about what Reactive is, because I'm still not
Gotcha.
catching that part.
Gotcha. Okay, so yeah, 40 minutes in, we'll tell you what Reactive is actually all about. Yeah, because we're having a low tech day anyway, so it seems fitting based on how we start. So keep me honest, Cam, and make sure that I answer that question, because I want to go back, because David asked a question that I'm like is now actually just left me. So I want to make sure I answer both questions, because it's like two parts. Your question was around what exactly, David?
Your friction points with the .NET Foundation, and if any of those ideas you've had were based on your experiences with Reactive UI.
For sure. So we were one of the early members into the .NET Foundation. So we're actually a .NET Foundation project, and like finding out how because Reactive UI at the point that I came to maintain was already mature, right? Like it's not like I created Reactive UI in my basement, like somebody else had done it, and I just wanted to make sure that it didn't die, because I was starting to depend on it, and I loved it. I want
to interrupt you real quick, just for our viewers. What does it mean for a project to be in the .NET Foundation? Like, if we're unfamiliar with that, what does that even mean?
It means this. It means that it's owned by the .NET Foundation. The .NET Foundation will provide resources. We're still trying to figure out what more resources we can provide to these groups, but it basically is just a stamp that says that this project fits our model, fits the direction that the foundation is trying to go, and is an example of what we consider what we want open source to be. Does that answer the question?
Perfectly. Yep.
Okay. So a lot of this is around my time as a maintainer of Reactive UI. I've been maintaining the library for 2 years, myself and Glenn Watson. Glenn's the main maintainer, so he's been around the project for 7-8 years. I've only been around the project for about 3, and I was maintaining the project within 6 months of coming to the project, right? So like I love it because everyone just drops me right in.
It sounds a little like, oh, well, Rodney's here, we don't need to do anything, he'll do it all.
Well, and the funny thing is, no, because Glenn does actually the majority of the heavy lifting. Glenn has been educating me on how to become a better maintainer, right? He's been the one that says, hey, Rodney, you were a little bit too flippant on that issue. You need to pull it back. You didn't really answer this person's question, or, when you were responding to this pull request feedback, you should have done it this way. Like, he's actually been grooming me to help if in the future he decides to step away, to maintain the project solo. Like, when I first started, I couldn't maintain the project solo, but now I feel like I could. And that's actually one of the things that I want from the .NET Foundation for its projects, is building a way to get maintainers in earlier so that we can groom them, so that when people need to step down, there's not this source of contention or friction. There can be a clean transition and a succession story. And that's the main thing there for me in the .NET Foundation, is finding a way to make it so that we have continuity for these projects.
Like,
it's really interesting. Go ahead.
Scott mentioned last week when we were talking to Claire, the left pad example, right? Where all of a sudden this package that hundreds, if not thousands of NPM packages had dependencies on, just went away. And
what does that look like?
Right.
And then to the earlier point, right? How can we expect enterprises to depend on this software? How can we call ourselves open source if the projects, the maintainers that create them, step away and the project dies? Then it's not really open source. It was just that guy's project, or that lady's project. That's what it is, right? Like, it's not actually open source. It's just somebody's project that solved the problem and everybody's consuming it. But like, let's find a way to make it maintainable going forward. So like, now the sales pitch, Reactive UI. So Reactive UI specifically is a set of extension methods for UI kits on top of .NET. Reactive Extensions is I like to coin it as a cross-platform specification for how to implement the observer pattern. So the Gang of 4 observer pattern, Reactive Extensions is a cross-platform specification for how to implement that. So in Java, JavaScript, Swift, Kotlin, Go, PHP, all of those languages, I should be able to use the same spec to affect reactivity. And now, like, what is reactivity, right? Because that's a really, really, random word. Reactivity is really just another name for response, right? It's a call and response. So the observer pattern. So anyone who's a web person and who has never used the library Mediator or Mediate R from Jimmy Bogart, I challenge you to go look at it, because that's actually kind of what one of the things Reactive Extensions is doing. It's giving you a way to deal with mediation, to broadcast signals. So in the .NET space, we have events, right? So Reactive Extensions wraps events, but it also does asynchrony. So it's inherently asynchronous. So from the perspective of, I want to respond to events from a UI kit, or the first place that I actually used Reactive Extensions was this. The first use case I ever used it for, I was working on a mobile application and we were implementing real-time notifications. And the requirement was such that I had to respond to notifications, but not every notification. And I was like, how am I going to write that? How am I going to just respond to every 10th event? I wrote 5 lines. Oh, here we go. The camera's over here. 5 lines of RX code, which I am glad to share later, which solved the problem. My boss looked me dead in the face and says, "That's black magic. Take it out." And I said, "But it solves the problem in 5 lines of code. Who doesn't want to solve problems in 5 lines? Like complex problems, right? We're talking about it. I have to read a channel off of the real-time server. I've got to make sure that the channel is correct. I've got to make sure that the notification, and 5 lines of code solved it. Like, magic, yeah, like that's what we all want. So
I feel like that's a bad manager. Managers should be the opposite. Like, find more black magic, right? You write less
all the
code,
black
right?
magic, all the magic. Bring it in. I don't care if I understand it, as long as you do, right? Like, that's exactly it. So what Reactive Extensions is in my mind is the natural progression of events in .NET, right? It is events with a purpose, if that makes sense. Right. So if you look at iNotify property change, right? So you're familiar with that Mvvm at all a little bit?
Yep,
so iNotify property change is really just an event in the .NET framework. It's an event with event arcs. So all we're saying is, instead of having to process every single event, right? I changed. Now I can wrap it in an observable and just look at it as a stream of events. Now it's not an individual event, right? I'm getting a stream of events from the event source. So now I can process that, and I can use link. I can use C# link on top of a stream of events the same way I do IEnumerable. So now I can do where clauses and selects, and I can do take until, and I can do this until change. Like, I can do distinct until change. I can do all of these things, and now and they're also composable. So at any given point, I can branch my logic and now start in a completely different work stream to respond to that exact same event, but use the prior logic. So, like, let's say we only wanted to check where it's not null. We can say this event source dot where not equal to null, and then say, hey, when it's not equal to null and the values above 2, do this, and when it's below null, do that. But we have a common extension point. So now we're not reusing code to go rewrite the same thing over and over again. We're building a composable, honestly, a business specific state machine for our problem that we're trying to solve. So if I had to give you the nutshell version, I would tell you that Reactive Extensions is the observer pattern built for .NET that allows you to build custom state machines, which the state pattern is another Gang of 4 pattern, right? That allows me to build custom state machines for my business's workflows.
And I saw Cam's head nodding and eyebrows furrowing at times, kind of trying to process a lot of that. So I'm going to restate some of it. Like, one of the things was, he mentioned like the iNotify property changed. Like, that was an interface that was very common with the Mvvm pattern, and simple models would actually implement that, and then they'd have behind their getters and setters properties, they would actually trigger a change saying that this thing happened, and then the UI would listen for those changes and update as the model changes, right? So what he's saying is, with Reactive UI, you can take those, listen to them, propagate them, stream them off, do whatever you want, and have a lot more finite control.
Yes.
Wizardry.
Yes. So it's funny, right? Like in the RX space, we all actually do use the concept of wizardry. Dave Sexton, I want to say, is the one. There's one guy that's prominent in the community, and I'm bad with names, but he actually wears the hat from Fantasia. So I made the joke. Right, so I made the joke that like I'm gonna get the hat, and like I'm working towards becoming a full-fledged RX wizard, right? And I'm like, once I become a full-fledged RX wizard, every time I give a talk about RX, I'm gonna wear the hat. One of my coworkers says she doesn't believe me, but I promise you, if I get that hat and they deem me worthy, I will do talks on stage with the Fantasia hat
That's amazing.
with a straight face.
I will be there just being like, this is the wizard, RX wizard.
we need to clip this and tweet it and keep him honest here.
Oh, please do. I said it on the internet, so it's true, right? Because otherwise people are going to come back and they're going to cancel me if I lied.
Yeah, yes and no. There is one out though. Our clause is that this is an unofficial stream. We're just powered by StreamYard. We're not the .NET Doc Show. So
I want
that's your out.
Today, then.
That's your out.
Yeah.
God, that's funny.
So does that answer your question, Cam?
It does. I'm gonna have to get a view into some code before it's completely concrete, but it does fill in the blanks.
So I don't have anything particular prepared, but I am happy to pull up a code sample and share my screen and walk through some of it. And it's funny because I'm actually going to bring up, if I can find it, if Rodney is paying attention today.
While you're pulling that up, I'm gonna say something to Cam here real quick. Cam is a lot of times he does a lot of stuff with IoT, and he's very familiar with if then that, right? Mm-hmm. It's the same concept, but
yes,
instead of tying into some cloud provider, you're doing it from C#, right? You're just saying, okay, if this thing happens, boom, go do this, and you write little streams elegantly, in a fluent API.
So,
right?
Okay, yeah. Think SignalR, right? SignalR is a push-based model. Mm-hmm. Reactive Extensions is basically SignalR closer to the metal.
Okay.
Right? Without a service behind it pushing it. The service that's pushing it is the event or the task that you're in your code versus some outside consumer. So now you can listen to that stream of stuff from that consumer, and it plays very well with SignalR, which is the beauty of it, right? Like I can send up a SignalR, it just pushes me data and I process it. And now the beauty of it is, and what I tell people is, it's Reactive Extensions is really just link over C#. Right? Yep. Like link over events. Let's call it that. Let's not even call it RX anymore. Let's call it link over events because that's easier for people to consume. When I tell you that I notify property change and I'm just going to get a stream of those events until they're done processing, that's easier to tell you than it is, hey, you've got this monad.
Right.
I'm gonna be honest, I still can't give you the actual definition of a freaking monad, man.
I hate that. I have to Google it every time.
Every time. See, I've got this code pulled up and I can kind of walk through it.
Can you share your screen?
Yes, I think I can if the internet permits.
There should be a button there in the bottom. Curious Drive is asking if we have a Blazor demo for this.
There actually is a full Blazor sample for Reactive UI. That is available. I don't have the link available to me, but actually, yes, I do. Let me go pull it real quick. Let's do the github.com/that thing. My dot samples. Come on, Roddy, you can do it. Typing is hard. So I'm going to paste this thing over to you, gentlemen, and you can go ahead and paste it out to the world.
While you're doing that, someone in the YouTube chat, Nicholas, commented that he doesn't even code in C#, but he just wanted to say how great Microsoft Dev support is right now. Dave and I think are like, hey, that's awesome because we're in DevRel, right? So that warms our cold little hearts.
Okay, so my screen is sharing.
Or my cold little heart. David's got a warm big heart.
All right, so it looks like I'm sharing, yeah?
Here, now you are.
Okay, and I actually changed my resolution so it's not horrible. Yay, streaming. Let's go ahead and just kind of dig in. This is a basic example, but this is actually the Prism sample that I wrote that I was telling you earlier with Dan Siegel. Dan and I got together and we're like, everyone wants to know, can you use Prism with Reactive UI? The answer is yes. And here, there's a sample out there on Prism that shows you how to do it. I wrote it myself, which means it's horrible. So if you have anything, submit PRs, fix it, make it better. Let's see if we can, actually, this is a great example, but let's see if we can find an example. So this is kind of what we were talking about when we talk about iNotify property change, right? This property on this view model will raise a notification event if there's a change, right? And then I can just come here and read things off of this property. So like specific, like I said, it's there's extension methods, but I can do like a win any value on the thing that I'm on. And now I'm going to get access to the property, which is going to be the package search metadata, right? So now anytime that value changes, and I'm going to apologize because this is completely unscripted and unprepared, right? Live coding at its best.
That's perfect.
Oh, we love it. It's because like I've been doing streaming and it's just like, man, who cares if it's right? Like we all make mistakes. We're all developers. We're all human.
Absolutely.
So like now I've got this win any value. What this extension method will do, and I'm going to do a var thing trademark. My thing is now an I observe. Oh, of course not, because I have a dot. It is now an I observable of I package search metadata, right? So now I have an observable. So I have a pushed based collection that I can do things with. So like I was saying earlier, I can do it directly on the win any value, but to show you the composability, I can do thing dot subscribe here. Subscription is the same thing as like an event dot invoke. So if you did, event handler question mark dot invoke, it's the same thing as subscribe, right? But this is an asynchronous extension point to get back there. I'm going to have to bring in a namespace because what's in a namespace. And now I can subscribe to that and do one thing here. And here I can actually do, thing one. And then here I can do, come on. Typing is hard. Thing two, right? But I only want to do thing two where x dot the thing, bring in more namespaces, x dot the thing is listed, right? And then maybe I want to do a select because I want to transform the thing out and I really only want the description, right? This value gets changed to a new value. It will notify me, the consumer. And you'll also notice that all of my code is in my constructor. The constructor is, as we say in development, is the most important part of the class. Well, now all of my business logic is composed in my constructor. And instead of telling the code to go do these things, I am telling the code when you are in this state, go do this thing. So now I don't have to manage the individual code bits. All I have to do is say, hey, the thing is listed, select out the description, go do the thing too. Done. And it'll just go to it.
So it's a lot more declarative, right? And fluent. So instead of saying like, if this thing is listed, and so rather than writing some manual callback and saying, if this is listed, then I want to walk up to the description and then I want to do some sort of thing. Now it's just where it's listed, select the value and subscribe to it. Now we're done in handling that entire event chain.
Exactly. And I can, and it's composable, right? So I can do any number of things I want. I can even combine this with another event, right? So like people, the one I always give is I say, you can actually merge an event and a task. Yeah. So I can say, I have this network call that needs to return, but I only want to process it after this event happens. I can do all that in one succinct pipeline. That's as opposed amazing. To like now I have a consistent API to deal with tasks and events, and I can use something that I already know and love, Link, which candidly is the #1 feature that made me stay in love with C#. Just saying.
Absolutely. I love me some Link. We're getting close. We've got 2 minutes left on the show, so let's have some closing thoughts here. I was thinking I wanted to add, go ahead,
hold on. It's Monday. We have a lot of padding built into our schedule. I do want to get Parsnip's question because it sounds like we have the right person to answer this. Do you have a limit to how far you're willing to go when chaining methods using reactive extensions? So do you find it easier or harder to decipher what 5 to 10 chained methods are doing versus imperative code?
Oh, this is actually a really good question. And I'm going to give a very real world answer because I've actually been teaching RX to a team of developers recently, right? So now I'm not just answering it from some place of hearsay. Like I've been having to teach it and answer these questions. I will say this, the feedback that I get from the developers, from every developer, whether they actually know what the code is doing or not, is that the code is more readable. We as developers spend the majority of our time reading code more so than writing code. I do not care what you say. If you tell me that you spend more time writing code, then I'm going to tell you that you are like literally a God developer because you have to go and look at what somebody else did. So yes, it can be daunting. But what it does is it creates a consistent way of doing things. Now it's not like, oh, well, I'm doing this imperative piece over here this way or that imperative piece over there that way. It's I'm doing everything declarative right here in my view model or in my constructor. So it's not that the imperative approach is a bad. It's that the majority of complexity that we deal with in our application is state change. And you as an imperative developer have to manage those state changes. You have to set the state. I no longer have to set the state. The state changes and I react. And that's the concept behind reactive extensions, is like, I am no longer controlling the state. I just react in response to the state change. So yes, it can become harder, but as you read it more, it really reads like an English sentence. And that's what I tell my developers. Don't ask me what it is, how we're going to write it. Give me the English sentence that answers the question that we're trying to solve. Where the thing is listed, I need the description and I need to do something with it, right? That's very easily readable. Now, the other thing I'll tell you about from a readability perspective, what I see a lot of times in code is people will have like, they don't really care about like how their code is laid out. I am really anal and I want my code laid out this way. Like, I don't want all this here and this here. Like, I want every function defined on its own line so I can read it. Where this, like, everything is very neat and easy to consume. So there are techniques that can help you get there. And if you find me on Twitter, I will gladly sit down and expose to you my playbook. As a matter of fact, one of my coworkers actually put an issue on my blog post. Open source said it's best. My blog is open source. So she put issues on there and told me, I want you to answer these questions. I'm like,
that's kind of cool.
Exactly. Like that's what you want. So like, I'm going to answer some of those questions coming up in a blog post. I hate the term best practices. I like the term better practices because there is no best, right? There is no silver bullet, but we can get close.
Absolutely. Yeah. If there's infinite time, there's always a better way to do something.
There you go.
And I was going to say too, like, we're talking about a reactive UI, but when we go back down to like reactive, like I've done a ton of development with that in the past, and you can actually build out full-on service tiers where you expose just encapsulated bits of logic and you chain things off and you expose little, over events. It's not a big deal. So going back to Parsnip's question, it all really depends on, I guess, not best practices, better practices, right? But you have to have a team of development people that you agree with, right? You have to work together to decide the best practices. I keep saying best practices.
The practices for the team,
right? It's part of the community aspect, right? It's not one person's view of the world. It's the joint, collection of view of the world. So,
and Cam, I'm going to offer this to you. You do IoT stuff. A buddy of mine just ported one of our RX libraries into JavaScript dynamic data, which is like the best way to. It's what observable collection should have been.
Okay.
I will gladly, anytime you are available, we can schedule some time, and I would love to sit and show you how you can use dynamic data to get RX value out of your Internet of Things.
I very well might take you up on that. In fact, that actually sounds like a great topic for another show.
So I wouldn't be the best for that. I'll put you in touch with my buddy who did that, and he would, because he's a web guy. He does TypeScript and C#, and he found dynamic data, and he was like, "Oh my God, this is so amazing! I have to have it in JavaScript." So he went and ported it over to JavaScript,
Awesome.
TypeScript to be specific.
Awesome, that's great. So next week we're gonna have our good friend Sam.
Friend.
My internet's choppy. Friend. My good friend, our good friend.
Did you pay the bill?
Yeah. No, they didn't yet. I don't think so. Yeah, it's going to be great. Anyways, thank you so much, Rodney. Really appreciate your time. This has been awesome. I've learned a lot. It's been great to have you on.
David, Cam, thank you so much for the opportunity. Like, this was enjoyable. Like I said earlier, most time, like, people invite you to talk and it's really, really daunting because you got to prepare a whole bunch of stuff. I'll tell you flat out, folks, like, I had nothing prepared. I asked David the other day, should I have something prepared? He's like, yeah, no. Like, okay, great. Let's just talk. Let's just be humans and talk. So I appreciate it.
Awesome. Love it.
Well, again, this has been the .NET Doc Show, and hopefully next week we will have paid our StreamYard bill and we will have our branding back. And with that, there's no fancy outro or anything like that. We're just going to wave and say, see you next week.
Next
Bye.
time.